Have you ever faced an unjust situation that made you question the world around you? Well, this is the story of a black family who experienced just that on a plane. A routine flight turned into a nightmare when a flight attendant made the disastrous mistake of kicking them off the plane. What seemed like a regular issue quickly escalated when the shocking truth was revealed. This family didn't just have a seat on the plane, they owned the entire airline. Stay tuned as we dive into the unbelievable. It was supposed to be an ordinary flight, a routine journey that many of us have taken countless times. But for this particular family, it turned into something much more dramatic. It all started when they boarded the plane, just like any other passengers, ready to travel. Little did the flight attendant know, this family was about to change the entire course of her day, and the future of the airline itself. The moment the flight attendant asked the family to leave, no one anticipated what would. The family was in shock, not only from being asked to leave the plane but from the sudden and aggressive nature of the flight attendant's actions. As they stood there, confused and frustrated, they tried to explain that they had done nothing wrong. The flight attendant, however, was determined. What followed was a tense back and forth, with the family trying to understand why they were being singled out. Passengers nearby watched in disbelief as this situation, which started as a misunderstanding. It wasn't until the situation was about to take a darker turn that someone from the family spoke up, quietly revealing a detail that would change everything. "We own this airline," they said, their voice calm but firm. The flight attendant, still flustered, paused. At first, it didn't register. But then, the truth sank in. This wasn't just a random family, they were the owners of the airline. The flight attendant froze, realizing her grave mistake. What was supposed to be a simple task of enforcing? The atmosphere inside the plane shifted immediately. Passengers who had once been spectators were now fully engaged, some questioning how the situation had gotten so out of hand. The flight attendants and the crew quickly went into damage control mode, scrambling to fix the situation, but it was too late. The family had already been humiliated in front of dozens of passengers. But the real story wasn't just about the flight attendant's mistake, it was about the family's power and the systemic ISS. As the flight attendants tried to smooth things over, the family remained composed. They knew that this was more than just an embarrassing moment for the airline, it was a reflection of the systemic issues that often go unnoticed in the world of corporate power. The family had seen it all before, being judged, overlooked, and underestimated. But now, with the revelation of their ownership, they knew that things would never be the same. The flight attendants quickly realized that this wasn't just. But the story didn't end there. In the aftermath of the incident, the airline came under intense scrutiny. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, the world was talking about what had happened. The flight attendants' actions and the family's revelation sparked debates about power, privilege, and the mistreatment of people based on their race or status. The airline was forced to issue an apology, but it was clear that the damage had been done. This was more than just a public relations disaster. As the story gained momentum, the public was divided. Some sided with the family, applauding them for standing their ground and demanding respect. Others criticized the flight attendant, claiming she was merely following protocol. The debate raged on, but the underlying issue was clear. The actions of one individual had ignited a conversation about larger societal problems, racism, inequality, and the invisible power dynamics that shape our everyday lives. In many ways, this incident had become The family's calm response to the situation contrasted sharply with the flight attendants' flustered attempts to control the situation. They weren't interested in revenge or drama, they wanted justice and respect. This wasn't just about getting kicked off a plane, it was about standing up against a system that often fails to recognize their worth. The family's ownership of the airline wasn't just a privilege, it was a statement of power, resilience, and a refusal to be silenced. In the weeks that followed, the incident sparked discussions across social media, with hashtags like #AirlineMistake and #RespectBlackOwnership trending globally. People from all walks of life expressed their support for the family, while others took to online platforms to criticize the flight attendants' actions. The situation became a rallying point for those who believed that corporate structures need to change, that no one should be treated as less than because of their race or background. As for the flight attendant, she faced backlash too. While many understood that she was simply following the airline's rules, others felt that her actions were a result of unconscious bias. The incident raised questions about training within the airline industry and whether enough was being done to prepare staff for the complexities of dealing with diverse passengers. Could this incident have been avoided with better training and awareness? It was a question that the airline, and the entire industry. The family's response was one of grace and dignity. They made it clear that their goal wasn't to tear down the airline, but to highlight the issues that had been lingering beneath the surface for far too long. They called for change within the company and a deeper conversation about how passengers, especially those from marginalized communities, are treated. This wasn't just a chance for them to correct a wrong, it was an opportunity to spark a larger movement. And they weren't going to let The aftermath of the incident was swift. The airline made several attempts to smooth things over with the family, but the damage was done. Their actions became a reminder that in today's world, people are still judged by their race, status, and even the way they carry themselves. The family refused to back down, demanding accountability and change. What started as an embarrassing incident for the airline had evolved into a moment of reckoning. The airline's apology was only the beginning. As more details about the family's story came to light, many began to question the structure of the airline industry. How many other incidents like this had gone unnoticed or brushed aside? The family's ownership of the airline gave them a unique platform to raise these concerns, but it also highlighted an uncomfortable truth: corporations often fail to see their employees and customers as equals. The family had been overlooked and mistreated because they didn't fit the typical corporate mold. Why? The public's response was mixed, but one thing was clear: the incident had ignited a larger conversation about the relationship between power, race, and corporate America. What if the roles had been reversed? What if the flight attendant had known who the family was before the incident? The question lingered in the minds of many. Would the situation have played out differently? Could the flight attendant have avoided making a mistake if she had known about the family's ownership? It raised deeper. With the eyes of the world now on them, the family didn't just focus on the incident at hand. They began to use their platform to push for wider reform in the airline industry and beyond. They spoke about the need for diversity, better training for employees, and the importance of respect. But their message wasn't just about airlines, it was about societal change. They made it clear that this wasn't just about a single mistake on a plane, it was about changing how society views and treats people. In the end, the airline was forced to confront its own shortcomings. While it may have issued an apology, the real work was only just beginning. The family's story had become a catalyst for change, pushing the airline to rethink its policies and internal culture. For the family, this incident wasn't just a moment of personal vindication, it was a chance to make a meaningful difference. They had turned a negative experience into a powerful platform for advocating for change, proving that sometimes. In the wake of the incident, the family's actions began to inspire others across the globe. People who had long been marginalized or overlooked now had a symbol of hope. This story wasn't just about a family fighting back, it was about standing up for what's right, regardless of your status or background. The family's ownership of the airline added a unique twist, but their message was clear: no one should ever be treated unfairly, regardless of their race, wealth, or position. While some were quick to defend the flight attendant, it was hard to ignore the broader implications of what happened. This wasn't just a case of a flight attendant making a mistake. It was a reflection of deeper issues within the industry and society at large. The family had become the face of a movement, but they didn't seek fame, they sought fairness. They wanted people to understand that the real fight was for equality, for an end to the biases that plague our everyday interactions. And as the The media coverage of the incident continued to grow, and with it, the conversation shifted. People began asking questions about how often incidents like this happen in other industries. The airline was now in the spotlight, but the family had already shifted the focus to something bigger. It wasn't about revenge or trying to bring down the airline, it was about holding corporations accountable for the way they treat their customers, especially when those customers don't fit the mold of what's seen. As the family continued to speak out, they found allies in unlikely places. Other business owners, civil rights activists, and even some within the airline industry began to offer their support. This wasn't just a battle for one family, it was a fight for systemic change. The family's ownership of the airline became a powerful metaphor for what was possible when people from all walks of life took a stand. They weren't just advocating for themselves, they were advocating for everyone who had ever. Looking back, the family realized that this one incident had sparked a wave of change they never could have anticipated. What started as a routine flight had become the catalyst for a global conversation about race, power, and respect. They had taken something negative and turned it into an opportunity for growth, for advocacy, and for change. And as they continued to fight for a better, more equal world, they knew that they had made a difference. They had shown the world that when you stand up. As the weeks went by, the airline began to feel the weight of public opinion. Customers started to question whether they should continue flying with a company that had allowed such a blatant act of discrimination. The family's story had struck a nerve with people from all walks of life, and soon, the company had no choice but to respond. The pressure mounted as consumers demanded to know what steps the airline was taking to ensure that such an incident would never happen again. The family's fight. Despite the backlash, the family remained focused on their mission. They knew that this moment, as difficult as it was their chance to create lasting change. Rather than taking legal action or seeking personal gain, they chose to use their platform to drive awareness about corporate responsibility and the need for better treatment of customers. They continued to speak out, not just for themselves, but for every person who had ever been dismissed or mistreated in an environment of power. In interviews and public statements, the family stressed the importance of accountability. They weren't looking for retribution, they wanted to ensure that the airline's leadership understood the gravity of what had occurred and took the necessary steps to improve the company's culture. The family's call to action resonated with thousands of people, from everyday passengers to high-profile activists. They wanted an industry-wide overhaul, one that could begin with an apology but would ultimately. The airline eventually issued a public statement of apology, acknowledging their role in the incident and promising to implement a series of measures aimed at improving their treatment of customers. But for the family, the apology was only part of the equation. They knew that true change could only come from action, not words. They pushed for tangible changes, like diversity training for all staff members, better representation in leadership roles, and increased awareness of racial biases. The family's efforts didn't stop there. They began to meet with other companies, government officials, and civil rights groups to discuss ways to address systemic inequality within corporate America. The incident on the plane had opened a larger conversation about race, power, and how corporate environments often fail to address discrimination. The family had taken what seemed like a personal grievance and turned it into a powerful platform for advocacy. They were no longer just making noise. The family's advocacy began to gain serious traction. What started as a single incident on a plane had now blossomed into a broader movement. People across the globe were now questioning how much power corporations held over their everyday lives. Why were the voices of regular people often ignored? The family's courage had sparked a worldwide discussion about fairness, race, and equality, and soon, other influential figures joined the conversation. It became clear that the family had not only ch. While the public support continued to grow, the family remained humble, reminding everyone that this was never about personal gain. They weren't seeking fame or fortune, they were seeking a world where people were treated equally. This wasn't just about the airline incident, it was about a systemic shift in how corporations operate and how employees and customers should be treated with respect. They wanted a world where no one had to fear mistreatment based on their race, status, or background. Despite the growing support, there were still critics. Some believed the family's actions were an overreaction, while others thought the airline had been unjustly punished for a single mistake. The family's stance remained unwavering. It wasn't just about the flight attendant or the mistake. It was about creating a society where everyone was treated with dignity. They used their platform to educate others about unconscious bias and how it can deeply affect people's lives in ways that are often eye. As the movement grew, the family began to work closely with industry leaders to create actionable plans for reform. They weren't just calling out the mistakes of the past, they were offering solutions. By collaborating with experts in diversity and inclusion, they pushed for changes that could lead to more meaningful and lasting results. From increasing representation in leadership roles to revamping training programs, the family had turned their personal experience into a blueprint for corporate. At the core of their message was the idea that everyone deserves to be seen and heard. No one should be overlooked, ignored, or discriminated against, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The family's journey, from being mistreated on a plane to becoming global advocates for equality, showed the world that one act of courage can lead to a movement that changes everything. And as they continued their mission, they remained focused on the goal, to create a world where respect is the. As the family continued their campaign for change, they saw the real power of unity. Communities rallied behind them, from grassroots organizations to high-powered influencers. Everyone realized that this wasn't just about a single airline or a single family, it was about changing the way we all interact with one another. The story of the flight incident had grown into a beacon of hope, showing that every individual can be a catalyst for social change if they stand firm in their beliefs and fight. The airline, now fully aware of the enormity of the situation, started to make substantial changes. New policies were introduced to ensure that such a discriminatory incident would never happen again. But the family's influence didn't stop with this one company. As they worked with other industries, they emphasized the importance of inclusive environments where every individual, no matter their race or status, could thrive without fear of bias or discrimination. Their voice became a rallying cry. However, the family was careful not to let their newfound platform be misused. They knew their message needed to stay true to its roots: equality, respect, and accountability. While many offered their support, the family remained selective about the partnerships they formed, ensuring they aligned with their values. They didn't want to become just another talking point or hashtag, they wanted to be the driving force for real, meaningful change. This movement was never about celebrities or branding. In time, the story of the family and their fight against corporate discrimination became one of the most discussed stories of the decade. It wasn't just a viral moment, it was the beginning of a revolution in how we think about business, power, and the treatment of individuals. People realized that they didn't have to be powerless against injustice. If they stood together, if they spoke out, they could change the system. The family's legacy wasn't just their ownership of an airline, it was their. As they reflected on how far they'd come, the family understood that this was just the beginning. The road to true equality was long, and it wouldn't be paved by a single family or incident. But their story had opened a door, one that couldn't be closed again. It reminded the world that the fight for equality doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. It's a continuous journey, and as long as they had the opportunity, the family would keep pushing for change. Because true change is a marathon, no. As the movement grew, the family began to reflect on the personal toll this fight had taken on them. The attention, the pressure, and the responsibility of being at the forefront of such an important cause weren't easy to bear. But despite the challenges, they knew their mission was too important to back down. They began to see the incredible power of their platform, not just to bring attention to their story, but to create a larger conversation about equality, respect, and what it truly means to. Their efforts continued to inspire new movements in other industries. Corporate leaders and CEOs began taking notes, realizing that their practices needed to be re-evaluated. The family's story became a model for corporate responsibility and social justice, showing that leadership didn't just mean achieving profits, it meant ensuring that human dignity was at the core of every business decision. The family had proven that true power wasn't just about financial success, it was about making a meaning. With the support of so many individuals and organizations, the family began to expand their work into new areas. They started offering mentorship to young entrepreneurs, particularly from underrepresented communities. They knew that by empowering the next generation, they could help build a future where equality was woven into the fabric of every business. The family understood that the fight wasn't just about changing one company, it was about changing the entire culture of business. The family's story became a cornerstone of corporate reform, and their influence only continued to grow. They had become household names not just for what happened on that plane, but for the broader cultural shift they had instigated. People began to realize that change wasn't impossible, it just took courage, persistence, and the willingness to challenge the status quo. The family's unwavering belief in fairness became a guiding light for those fighting against inequality in. Looking back, the family knew that their journey had been far from easy. But they also knew that the road they had paved was worth every obstacle they had faced. Their fight had been for more than just themselves, it had been for every individual who had ever been overlooked or mistreated by systems of power. The family had become not just owners of an airline but champions of equality and justice, proving that no matter who you are or where you come from, you can make a difference. As time went on, the family's efforts began to take hold in more significant ways. The airline industry, once resistant to change, started to implement broader diversity initiatives. Other companies followed suit, taking a hard look at their internal practices and policies. Change wasn't happening overnight, but it was happening, slowly but surely. The family's impact was undeniable. They had forced the conversation about equality and respect into the public sphere, and businesses had no choice but as much as the family appreciated the progress, they knew the fight was far from over. The world was changing, but old systems of discrimination and power weren't easily dismantled. They continued to push, to speak out, and to advocate for policies that would ensure the next generation would have a more just and equal world. Their work was never about being satisfied with small victories, it was about ensuring that future generations wouldn't have to fight the same battles they had. The family's journey inspired countless individuals to take action in their own lives, encouraging them to speak up against injustice and demand better treatment. It wasn't just about corporate change, it was about individual empowerment. People began to realize that they had the power to stand up for themselves and others, whether in a workplace, a school, or on a plane. The family's story became a symbol of what happens when one person refuses to stay silent, and how that courage can create As they continued to advocate for change, the family faced a new challenge, balancing their private lives with their public advocacy. They were now recognized not just as business owners but as leaders in a movement for social justice. But even with the pressure of being public figures, they remained focused on their mission. They knew that the public spotlight was temporary, but the impact of their work could last for generations to come. They were determined to leave a legacy that went beyond. Looking back at everything they had accomplished, the family was proud, but they knew the journey wasn't over. Their efforts had sparked a global movement, but the fight for true equality and justice required constant vigilance. They had created a platform, opened doors, and inspired others to follow in their footsteps. The road to equality wasn't easy, but they had walked it, and in doing so, they had helped reshape the world. Their story would continue to inspire and remind everyone that As the family's movement continued to grow, they began to focus on the future. They knew that true change was an ongoing process, one that would require generations of work. But they were determined to set the foundation. By collaborating with organizations focused on education, advocacy, and policy reform, the family aimed to ensure that the fight for equality would never lose momentum. Their goal was to inspire new leaders, entrepreneurs, and activists who would carry the torch forward, building One of the most profound shifts came when the family started mentoring young business leaders and activists from underrepresented communities. They shared their experiences, teaching others not just about corporate responsibility but about the importance of staying true to one's values in the face of adversity. The family's legacy began to take root in countless communities, each person they mentored becoming a part of the growing movement. Their reach expanded, not just through their business. Years after the infamous incident on the plane, the family's story continued to inspire. They had become a symbol of resilience, determination, and the power of using one's voice for change. What had started as an act of resistance in the face of injustice had grown into a global call for equality, a reminder that when we fight for what's right, we can change the world. The family was no longer just part of the corporate world, they had become key figures in the ongoing battle for social justice. Looking to the future, the family remained hopeful. While they had come so far, they knew there was still much work to be done. But their mission was clear: equality for all. They had shown the world that no one was too small to make a difference, and no obstacle too big to overcome. Their journey wasn't just about business or personal gain, it was about creating a more just world for every individual, no matter their background. And as long as they had the chance, they would keep fighting for a